Hello Matrix and welcome to Wazimatrix. My name is Luni and today we'll be assisting you with your history exam guide for paper 2. All you need to do to get your questions and comments through to us is follow our social media pages, search for Wazimatrix, as well as hit us up on our WhatsApp line. All the details are on the screen. We've got a cool competition going on for you guys, so all you need to do to get those details is stay tuned. As always, I'm not alone. With me are my sign language interpreters, Keta and Nicolene, as well as our awesome teacher, Mamsi. Thank you so much, guys, and over to you.
Welcome, grade 12 learners. Today we are focusing on history paper 2. The aim of this show is to give you tips on how to write and answer your exam questions. I hope you're all prepared. Remember, these tips alone are not going to help you succeed. You also need to do the work from your side. You have to study very hard, know that content, know your work very well, but then these tips will also aid to that success. Okay, so as I said to you, we are looking at history paper 2. So if we look at how the paper looks like, it is out of 150 marks, it's 3 hours long. And there are 2 sections, Section A and Section B. I will give you a breakdown of what each section consists of, but you have to be mindful of the time because you don't want to see yourself going over time or not being able to answer all the questions because you have not planned your time properly. Now, as you will see when I give you the instructions, you're expected to answer 3 questions. So the suggestion is that you spend an hour per question. Okay, and then what really works is to use the reading time that you're given before you start writing. Now, you know that history is a very content-heavy subject. The textual sources that we normally give you are very long. So you need to use the reading time to go through those sources, to read the questions, make sure you understand them, so that when it comes to writing, you do not waste any time. That is very, very important, grade 12s. Okay, let's carry on. So, if you look at Section A, there are 3 source-based questions, and there will be a source material booklet that contains the different sources that is required to answer these questions. So, if you look at Section A, there are 3 questions that you have to choose from. The first one is civil resistance, 1970s to 1980s, South Africa. Question 2, the coming of democracy in South Africa and coming to terms with the past. And then question 3 is the end of the Cold War and a new world order, 1989 to the present. Now guys, remember I told you that there is a choice here. So you have to make sure that you choose a section that you have studied. Don't just choose a section because the questions look easier or it looks more interesting than the section that you have prepared. Make sure that you stick with what you have prepared beforehand. That is very important. So that is your Section A. Now let's go over to Section B. Now Section B consists of 3 essay questions. If you look at the questions in Section B, they're very similar to your questions in Section A. Civil resistance, 1970s to 1980s, South Africa. That is the crisis of apartheid in the 1980s. The coming of democracy to South Africa and coming to terms with the past, and then the end of the Cold War and a new world order, the events of 1989 to the present. Now guys, remember earlier I told you that you have to choose a section that you have studied. If you decide to study one section for the source-based section and then another section for the essay, that is fine. However, if you decide to focus on just one section, please make sure that you are prepared to answer both the source-based and the essay questions from that section. You do not want to only focus on short questions because then you will have a problem when it comes to writing your essay. Remember, there are different skills that you're expected to know and to portray when you're answering those different sections. That is very, very important. Okay, now let's move on. So this is how you're supposed to make your choices. You have to answer 3 questions. One must be a source-based question, one must be an essay question, and then the third one is up to you. You can choose either a source-based question or an essay question. So again, earlier I told you that you can decide to choose one section to study, but that will be a problem because remember, you are answering 3 questions. Okay, there will be one source-based question from a topic and one essay question. That means your third choice will come from another topic. You have to make sure that you are prepared. So it's very important for you to know these things. Don't just go there knowing one thing because you will be stuck and you will lose a lot of marks if you don't answer all the 3 questions as expected. That's very important, guys. Okay. Now, time management is very important when you are writing your exam. As I've already said to you, this is a 3-hour paper and there are 3 questions you expected to answer. So the suggestion is that you spend at least 1 hour per question. Okay, that is a suggestion. So if you spend, let's say, half an hour in source-based, that means you have more time to spend on your essay. Okay, so, but please be mindful that you only have 3 hours. You are not going to get extra time. And you have to use your reading time very well. As I said before, that reading time can be used to read the sources, make sense of what they're saying. Later on, we are going to look at how you analyze the sources, what sort of things you look for. So you can do all those things during your reading time. But what really helps is to read the questions before you read the sources, so that when you go to read the sources, you know exactly what sort of things to look for, what sort of information to look for that will help you answer the specific questions. There is no point in reading the sources when you don't even know what questions are going to be asked based on those sources. So guys, don't forget, read the questions first and then go and read the sources, so that when you're reading the sources, you are working out the answers to those questions. Okay, and another very important thing is that you look at the mark allocation for individual questions. Now, you are historians, you've been writing history exams for a very long time. You know that mark allocation is very important. So what will often happen is that the instruction word in the question will tell you to give 2 or 3 things, whatever they're looking for, whatever the question is looking for. But the mark allocation is also a guide as to how much you should write. For example, if something is out of 2 marks, they're expecting 2 points. So don't end up writing a paragraph or an essay for 2 marks. That means you are wasting time that could be better used for longer essays or longer questions, like paragraph questions. As you will see later on, there are paragraphs in this paper. So please make sure that you only answer what you're required to answer. Don't write more than what is required. Look at the instructions in the question and then look at the mark allocation. That is very important. Okay, let's carry on. So when answering the questions, you should apply your knowledge, skills, and insight. That is another very important thing in history, that don't think that just because you're answering source-based questions, that everything is just comprehension. Yes, the paper or the exam will be expecting you to comprehend or understand the sources. However, you have to understand them in context. That means you have to have prior knowledge. You have to have studied for your exam. And also, there will be questions that ask you to use your own knowledge. That means if you haven't studied, you will not be able to answer the own knowledge questions. So that is very important. So you have to have a combination of own knowledge and then the specific skills of understanding how to answer questions in history, like knowing the historical concepts. That's very important. And also just understanding the instruction words, because what often happens is that people lose marks because they don't understand what they're expected to do. You will find that you've studied very hard, you know your work very well, but if you don't understand the meaning of the instruction word, then you end up doing the wrong thing. It's very important that you go through past papers as you practice and preparing for exams. Even though the questions will not be exactly the same and the sources will not be exactly the same, but past papers will give you an idea of how your exam is going to look and what type of questions you're likely to get. Okay. And then you will be disadvantaged by merely rewriting the sources. As I said to you, we are not testing just comprehension when we ask source-based questions. We want you to incorporate your own knowledge as well. You can only quote from the source if the instruction says so. Don't just rewrite the sources. The sources are already there. The examiners and markers have the sources in front of them. So what is there for you to do is to prove that you've understood the sources and you can apply your skills of comprehension, okay, analyzing the sources, understanding historical concepts. Because the problem is if you just rewrite the source, you are not showing any of those skills. So it's very important that you know exactly what you are expected to do. Okay, let's move on. So what we're going to do in the next segment after break, we are going to look at the types of questions you're likely to get. We're going to give you examples of questions and I'm going to show you how to read instruction words, what sort of things to underline and highlight, and also the mark allocation. We will be using last year's exam paper as an exemplar to show you how to work through the different questions and how to make sense of your history paper. And I hope you will do very, very well because of the tips we're giving you guys. Okay, over to you, Luni. I'll see you after the break, guys.
Matrix, we'll take a quick break, but before we do, don't forget to send your questions and comments through to all of our social media platforms and we'll assist you as best as we can. We'll see you straight after this. Welcome back from the break, Matrix. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you've just joined us, we are assisting you with your exam guide to help prep for the upcoming exam. If you're someone who's constantly running out of data, then this next competition is just for you. Wizomatrix is bringing you the hashtag WozoWinner competition, where 2 lucky matriculants stand a chance to win 2 gigs of data. So head on over to our Facebook page and all of the details will be there. Enough talking from my side, over to you.
Welcome back, guys. Okay, we are still looking at history paper 2 and we are giving you tips for success in your exam. Okay, now remember, before the break, I gave you the breakdown of the paper, what to look for, how long the paper is, how much time you're supposed to use there, and so on. Now, I'm going to look at the specific skills that you're expected to know and demonstrate when you're answering this paper. And we are also going, as I said before the break, we are going to look at an example of a question from last year's paper, just to show you how to deal with the different questions in your exam. So, if you look at the skills that are required for answering paper 2, you should be able to extract information from the sources. Now, extracting information from the sources does not mean just taking anything that is in the source. It means that you have to understand the source, and as I said before, you have to understand the question, because you don't want to end up extracting things that are not relevant to answering your question. So the sources will be very long. That means they will contain different things. Sometimes they will contain the reasons why things happened, but they can also have, you know, the dates as to when things happened. So if the question is asking you for the reasons why a particular thing or event happened, you can't answer that by just giving a date. You have to look for the specific thing that the question requires you to give. That is very important, guys. So remember, those things work hand in hand. It's your understanding of the sources and being able to understand the questions and do what the questions require you to do. Don't forget that. Okay, and then you have to select relevant information. As I said to you before, you can't just randomly select information. You have to make sure that the information that you select is the information that will help you answer that question. It is relevant to the question. Okay, so those are the skills that you are required to demonstrate in this paper. Okay, and then these are the basic skills in history. You should be able to interpret. That is where I was saying before that you need to be able to say things in your own words. Now, if you just extract information from the sources, that means you have no skills of interpreting a source. When you interpret a source, that means you are able to make conclusions based on what the source is saying. And you are able to then write or rewrite it in your own words. That is very important. Okay, the only time you can take the words of the source as they are is when you are asked to quote directly from the source. If you're not asked to quote, please do not rewrite the source. You need to show understanding by using your own words. That is very important, guys. Okay, you need to analyze and synthesize. Okay, now again, as an historian, you should be able to do these skills. Very, very important. When you're analyzing, that means you're breaking things down and you're looking for the reasons behind or the message that is being portrayed in the source. And then when you are synthesizing it, that means this happens especially in the paragraph questions where you're able to bring the different views together to formulate an argument or an answer to your question. So that is very important. So you can see the things that work together and the things that do not work together. You will remember that when we're doing history paper 1, we looked at the compare and contrast questions as well. That is very important. That is part of synthesizing because you're able to see all the information that is similar and all the information that is different. So you need to be able to do those things. And remember, as I said before, you have to understand the instruction words. That is going to help you. Now let's move on. Okay, another very important thing you need to do is to be able to define the concepts in historical context. That is very, very important. Now, as you know, in history, we have different concepts that go with the different topics that you will have studied. And by concepts, I mean things like democracy, nationalism, the Cold War, apartheid. And you should be able to define those in your own words. So what will happen in an exam situation is that the word will just be found in the source, but they will not give you the meaning of the word. So you have to be able to define it using your own words, but in historical context. That means you have to have prior knowledge of that event. That is very important. Now, I'm not going to go through all the different concepts in history because they are all topic related. So you will know from studying the different topics that they all come with different concepts. So please make sure that you know all those concepts. For instance, if you are looking at the collapse of the Soviet Union, you need to know the meaning of words like perestroika, glasnost, or if you're looking at the Cuban Missile Crisis, you need to know words like brinkmanship and so on. Those are historical concepts. It's very important to understand what they mean and to be able to define them in your own words. Okay. And then the next thing is to be able to compare perspectives. So now you will know that history sources come from different people who might have experienced the event in different ways. For instance, if you're looking at South African history, if a source is written by a member of the National Party, his perspective will obviously be different from someone who was a member of the Black Consciousness Movement or even the ANC. So you should be able to look for information in the source that shows you those different perspectives. Okay, the caption usually helps you understand where the source comes from, but the content of the source is also very, very important. Okay, sometimes you can have a source written by a journalist, and the words that the journalist uses in the source can tell you what ideology he subscribes to, whether he agreed with the government or he disagreed with the government. So all those things speak to the different perspectives of the event. Okay. And then the next thing that you need to be able to do in this paper is to ascertain the usefulness and limitation of evidence in the sources. Now, this is where most students struggle. When we're saying, is this a useful source, or what is the usefulness of the source? That is different from saying, is this a reliable source? If you get a question asking you, is this a reliable source, that is asking you if the source can be trusted. In other words, was the person giving the speech or talking, okay, saying something that is true or not? That is the reliability. However, when we are looking at the usefulness, we are asking if the source can give us any useful information to understand the event. And by useful information, I don't only mean positive information. Sometimes a source can give you negative perspectives of the people at the time. And that source is useful in understanding what the different people thought or felt at the time. So the source is useful because of the information it gives you, regardless of who says it. Okay, and then the source cannot be useful. If you say, no, it's not useful, maybe it's because it has left out a lot of information. The information that is there cannot be used, or it cannot help you understand a particular event. And then when you look at the limitation of the source, that is where we will be looking at the negative things about the source. Is this person giving all the information? Is this person biased towards or against a particular government or issue? Okay. You also need to look at when the source was made, because that can also be a limitation. If somebody is writing in 2020 about something that happened in 1995, they are likely to leave out a few things, because we know what happens to memory. As human beings, we forget things that happened a long time ago. So when you're looking at a source, you need to look at it in historical context, and you should be able to say that the author has left out important evidence about the event, because this source was written 10, 20, or 30 years after the event. Or another limitation could be the fact that this is a person who favored the government. Okay, he is obviously portraying the opposing side in a negative light. So all those things speak to the limitation of the source. So guys, please don't forget those very important skills. Usefulness and reliability are not the same. You can have a source that is not reliable, but useful. It is useful in a sense that it can give us information about what happened during the time. However, it cannot be trusted because maybe it is biased. Okay, I hope you understand the difference between those two. Let's carry on. So, if you look at an example here from last year's paper, okay, it's an analysis of a source-based question. We are looking at the topic, what role did the South African Students' Organization, SASO, play in conscientizing Black South Africans? Okay, so it's very important for you to also understand the meaning of the word conscientize in order to understand the source and the question. Now, let's look at the question. The question says you need to quote, and you're quoting 2 reasons from the source about what prompted Black South African students to join NUSAS. Now, if you look at that, it's very, very important. You can see that you are not expected to give your own words. You are not expected to analyze. You're expected to extract, quote directly from the source. 2 reasons from the source. And then you look at your mark allocation there. That tells you. Remember, I told you that the instruction will tell you, okay, you're looking at 2 reasons, and you can see the mark allocation there says 2. Okay. And then the next one is, remember I spoke to you about being able to define concepts. This one says, define the concept of apartheid in your own words. Okay, again, the definition will not be in the source. That is why the question is asking you to define it in your own words. So it's very important to understand those concepts. And then another question that they might ask you is using the information in the source and your own knowledge. Now guys, remember I told you that there has to be a balance between own knowledge and using information from the source, because you are not just extracting information from the source, but you are using your own prior knowledge as well. That is very important. Now you need to explain why Biko felt it was necessary for the formation of SASO in 1969. Okay, that's very important. Now this is the source. We are not going to read the entire source because chances are you are not going to get exactly the same source in this year's exam. This comes from last year's exam, but this is just to show you the things that you're supposed to look for. The first thing is the caption. The caption is very, very important because it tells you what the source is about, even before you start reading the source. Now let's read the caption together. It says, the source below focuses on the reasons. So you already know. Now remember, there was a question that asked you for the reasons. The reasons for the establishment of the South African Students' Organization. And then when you're reading the whole source, you need to underline those reasons. Okay. So guys, please don't forget, reading a caption is very, very important because it helps you understand what the source is about. Okay, so we are going to carry on with analyzing a source-based question after the break. I hope you guys have gained a lot from looking at these questions that I've done with you. I will see you after the break. Over to you, Luni.
Matrix, we'll take a quick break, but before we do, don't forget to send your questions and comments through to all of our social media platforms, and we'll assist you as best as we can. We'll see you straight after this. Welcome back from the break, Matrix. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you've just joined us, we are assisting you with your exam guide to help prep for the upcoming exam. If you're someone who's constantly running out of data, then this next competition is just for you. Wizomatrix is bringing you the hashtag WozoWinner competition, where 2 lucky matriculants stand a chance to win 2 gigs of data. So head on over to our Facebook page and all of the details will be there. Enough talking from my side, over to you.
Welcome back, guys. Okay, I hope you enjoyed the segment before the break and you now understand exactly how to analyze the questions in the exam. Okay, now let's carry on and I'm going to give you some suggested answers to the questions we looked at before the break. Now, I hope you remember the first question we looked at was, quote 2 reasons from the source about what prompted Black South African students to join NUSAS. Okay, I'm not going to underline the words because I did that over the break. Now, if you look at the answer, obviously you will not have access to this, but this is what the markers will be looking for. This is the extraction of evidence from the source, because the question asked you to quote directly from the source. It was spoken in its criticism of government action. Several white leaders emphasized or sympathized with the black cause by speaking out for them. Those are just some suggested questions. Now, what happens is, if you're asked to quote, you obviously give the exact words as they are found in the source. However, if you're defining things in your own words or you're analyzing, what we often say in the marking guidelines is that any relevant answer is acceptable. Okay, so you remember this question, define the concept of apartheid in your own words. So what you'll find is that apartheid will appear in the source, but it will not be defined. So you need to show your own understanding of having studied this section, okay, of what apartheid was. Now, if you look at the answer here, it's a definition of historical concept from source A. Apartheid was legislated by the National Party in 1948 that stipulated the separation of people based on their race, Africans, Indians, coloureds, and whites. It implemented laws such as the Group Areas Act. So when you're defining concepts, it does help to give some examples to show exactly that you understand what the concept is about. Okay, such as the Group Areas Act and others to ensure the separation of South Africans. Okay, and then another possible answer there could be apartheid means racial discrimination, where the apartheid government ensured that white South Africans had better jobs and opportunities than black South Africans. Or you could say it was a legal entrenchment of white privilege in most spheres, such as economic, political, and social. Okay, and then we say any relevant response. That is also acceptable. And then the next question was, using the information in the source and your own knowledge, explain why Biko felt it was necessary for the formation of SASO in 1969. Now remember, when we were reading that source, I underlined in the caption, I underlined the reasons. It said, this source is about the reasons why SASO was formed. Okay, so now if you look at the possible answer there, you're expected to interpret evidence from the source. So these are the possible responses. Biko and his colleagues felt that black South Africans needed to represent themselves by establishing SASO. Another possible response could be to establish their own organization to promote black unity. Okay, very important. To promote black unity, you will find that these are in the source. Self-reliance, solidarity, because black South Africans were not allowed to play a role in white South African politics. Biko and his supporters felt that an exclusive all-black movement, again, you will have seen this in the source, that this was an all-black movement, was necessary to make black South Africans to become politically aware of their rights. So all those are important things that you are going to give in your answer. Okay. Carrying on, NUSAS no longer met the needs of the black South African students. This you can get from both your own knowledge, because if you studied black consciousness, you will know that these students started as members of NUSAS, and they felt that NUSAS was no longer looking after the interests of black people. That is the reason why then a group of black students broke away to form SASO. Okay. So you can include that, because remember the instruction did say you're using the source and your own knowledge. So please make sure that when you're answering a question like that, you do not only answer it from the source. Make sure that some of the responses you give are from your own knowledge. Okay, and then another possible answer there is to challenge the apartheid regime or government regarding their racist policies, such as the refusal to allow mixed race accommodation or eating facilities. That obviously means at the universities. And then it says here, any other relevant response. Now remember, these are just marking guidelines, okay, just to show the marker what sort of things to look for. However, we do accept any response as long as it is relevant to answering the question. So if you've read the instruction words of the question and you understand the source, then give the relevant response and you will be fine. Okay. Let's carry on. Now, we are looking at a different skill, which is the analysis of a visual source. You already know that in an exam situation, you will get different types of sources. And it is very important for you to know how to deal with the different types of sources. Sometimes you will have textual sources, or you can have the visual sources. And visual sources can be a photograph or a cartoon. It's very important for you to know how to analyze those. Okay, so we are using an example of the TRC. How did the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, TRC, deal with the murder of political activist Ashley Krill? Now, let's look at the caption of this photograph before I show you the photograph. Guys, you will remember I told you that reading captions is very important, whether it's a textual source or a visual source. Now, remember what I said to you. Reading the caption helps you contextualize the source. It gives you a lot of information about who wrote the source, when it was written, and what the source is about. So please, when you get into the exam, don't just go straight to reading the source. You need to read the caption first, Because what you will find, especially with those questions that ask you for value and limitation of the source, or whether a source is reliable or not, you will find that the answer is actually in the caption rather than the source itself. Okay, so this is the caption. It says, the photograph below shows people carrying a banner protesting against, so they are protesting against the TRC's decision to grant amnesty for the murder of Ashley Krill. So when you're looking at the visual source, you need to see if it really shows that the people are protesting. And then you need to look for the visual clues that show that this was a protest. So let's carry on. The following words appeared on the banner: TRC, no justice for Ashley Krill. Now, this is the visual source. The caption has already told you that this was a protest. These two ladies were not just standing there having fun, they were actually protesting. So you need to look at that. And then you look at the banner they're carrying there. It does say in the caption that they were carrying a banner which says TRC, no justice for Ashley Krill. Okay. Now, if you look at the question, comment on what you think was implied by the words on the banner. TRC, no justice for Ashley Krill. Now, if you look at the mark allocation there, you can see it's 2 times 2. So it's very important. So when you're commenting, that means you are giving your own analysis. If you remember, the visual source does not tell you what this meant. TRC, no justice for Ashley Krill. Now you need to bring in your own analysis of that. You need to comment on what was implied by those words. So if you look at the possible answers here, this is where you're interpreting the evidence in the source. So you can say that the words meant that TRC had failed the family of Ashley Krill by granting Benzian amnesty. Benzian, who was responsible for the murder of Krill, was allowed to walk free. The family and friends of Krill did not find closure regarding the circumstances of his death. So again, you can see that that is your own interpretation and analysis of that visual source. Okay, if you look at these possible responses, they are not found in the visual. However, you are reading into it. That is very important to be able to do as a history student. Okay, let's carry on. Then the next question is, explain why you would regard the evidence in this source useful. So here is useful again. We've looked at that before. But it tells you specifically useful when researching the circumstances around the death of Ashley Krill. Okay, so it's the same visual source. Now, if you look at that, the skill there is to obviously look for usefulness of the source. Very important, guys. You are guaranteed to get a question asking you for the usefulness of the source. So you can say the source is useful because it shows that people protested against the TRC's decision regarding the death of Ashley Krill. It shows that not all people agreed with the TRC's findings regarding the murder of political activists such as Krill. Okay, so this is your visual source that I showed you before. Okay, you can also say that the source highlights how people felt about the TRC and how it dealt with the perpetrators of political violence, such as those who were responsible for the murder of Krill. The source can be corroborated with other sources to indicate how the TRC dealt with Krill. Because remember, guys, you are not reading or looking at this visual source in isolation. You will be looking at it together with the other sources that are there in the exam. Okay, they can be textual sources. So if you look at it, you will see that it agrees with the other sources. Okay. Now, the types of questions you're likely to get are justification. You should be able to compare the different sources. As I said to you before the break, you need to be able to read two sources and find things that are similar. When you're comparing, you are looking for things that are similar in the two sources. Okay, sometimes you can get a question asking you to compare and contrast. So when you're comparing, you're looking for similarities, and then when you're contrasting, you're looking for differences. It's very important to know the meanings of those words, because if you don't know them, then you will not be able to answer the question. And then you will get paragraph questions as well. So let's look at the example of justification here. Explain whether you think the TRC was justified. Now guys, if you don't know the meaning of the word justified, that means you will not be able to answer this question. It's very, very important to familiarize yourselves with the words that are used in a history exam and the historical concept, as I said before. Okay. So explain whether you think the TRC was justified in granting Benzin amnesty for the murder of Ashley Krill. Now, if you look at this response, you can go justified, and these are the reasons. Okay, Benzin appeared before the TRC and acknowledged his role. In other words, he gave full disclosure in the killing of Ashley Krill. So that is why you will say, yes, that was justified. Or Benzin was not acting on his own. The case or the action was politically motivated. He was merely implementing instructions from leaders of the apartheid government. Or you're allowed to say not justified as long as you can support it. So the question was asking you whether that was justified, the amnesty was justified or not. Now, you can choose. If you say, yes, it was justified, you should be able to support that with evidence from the source. Or you can say, no, it was not justified. Again, you should be able to support your position with evidence from the source. So if you feel that it was not justified, you can say it was because Benzin did not tell the truth about the role he played in the murder of Ashley Krill, or there was ample evidence to show that Krill was brutally tortured when he was murdered by Benzin. So again, guys, you can see there that you can go either way. You can say justified or not justified, as long as you can give evidence to support the position you've taken. Remember, as historians, we are always bound by evidence. You can't just say something because you feel like saying it. You should be able to support it with evidence from the source itself. Okay, now here, there's another question. Explain how the information in source 2b differs with the evidence in source 2c regarding the murder of Ashley Krill. Remember, we were looking at comparing. We are now looking at the differences. So again, here, you will be looking for the things that are similar. I'm not going to read all the answers here, but this is just to show you that when you're comparing, please make sure that you are looking for things that are similar. Don't start looking for differences there. That is very important. And then when you're writing a paragraph, remember you are synthesizing information. It says, using the information in the relevant sources and your own knowledge. This is very important, guys. Okay, you need to write a paragraph of about 8 lines. You also need to stick to the word limit. So if you're asked to write a paragraph of 8 lines, please don't end up writing 3 pages. This is not an essay. This is a paragraph. And please make sure that in your paragraph itself, you use information from the sources and you are using your own knowledge as well. Remember what I said to you before, that if you only use the source and there's nothing from your own knowledge, you are not going to do well. That is very important, guys. So I hope that helps you understand how to answer paragraph questions. And you only choose the relevant sources. Don't just write a paragraph from all the sources that you've read. So it's very important to read and understand the question and then choose the relevant sources to help you answer that paragraph question. So when you're writing a paragraph, you have to use relevant evidence. Okay, you have to use evidence effectively in an organized paragraph that shows an understanding of the topic. Do not just repeat or rephrase the sources. You have to use your own words. That is very important. Okay, and then be sure to incorporate your own knowledge and do not go over the word limit. I've already told you, don't write 3 or 4 pages. You are writing a paragraph. You should know the difference between a paragraph and an essay. That is very important, guys. I hope that helps you understand how to write a paragraph. And then when you're writing essays in section B, as I said when we were discussing history paper 1, you need to know the structure of the essay. You need to have an introduction, body, and conclusion to your essay. You need to take a stance in the introduction and then repeat it in the conclusion Do not add irrelevant background information. Content should not be descriptive. We should use it to develop a line of argument. That is very important. And then you draw a convincing conclusion that will be based on the evidence that you will have given. Guys, I hope you have benefited from the tips that we've given you on how to succeed in your history paper 2, and I hope you will do very, very well. Please don't forget to study hard, go over the past papers, and you will be fine. I wish you all the best. Over to you, Luni.
Thank you so much for tuning in, Matrix. It's been an amazing show. Congratulations to all of our winners who will be announced on Facebook after this show. For more revision, please visit our website on www.wozamatrix.co.za. From me, Luni, Keta, Nicolene, and Mamsi, thank you and goodbye.